What do you see happening now on the front line, as well as on the diplomatic front?
I mean, this is that which I and others have been saying is inevitable. I mean, this is the inevitable collapse of Ukraine. The Ukraine venture was unsustainable. Militarily, Ukraine simply can't slug it out with Russia, even when backed by the material and financial assistance of Europe and the United States. Um, we're now seeing Ukraine economically. It's a literal basket case. There is no functioning economy. It's all artificial, propped up, corrupt as the day is long. Um, we see a very difficult winter approaching for Ukraine. Their energy infrastructure has been taken out. They're now going to the generator economy, which means that prices for everything, even under optimal conditions, will rise 20-25% this winter, and that's 20-25% in an already dysfunctional, non-functioning economy. This will lead to political collapse, and we see that happening right now. I mean, all around Zelensky, the walls are falling. Um, I don't know how much longer he can hold on, if he's capable of holding on, if people want him to hold on. You know, he he was always a figurehead around which different power structures were constructed, and we see now one of the big power structures, the Yermak power structure, totally collapse, and there's really nothing to replace it. Um, and then we layer on top of that just the fact that Europe is just 100% dysfunctional when it comes to Ukraine. All talk, no action. They're incapable of any real action. I'm not worried about any escalation from Europe because they can't escalate. They have nothing to escalate with. Um, so it comes down to the United States managing the fall of Ukraine, and this, in the end, is what we're witnessing here. Is this a helping hand or is this euthanasia? You know, we don't we don't know exactly what's happening right now. One thing we do know is that Russia's in the catbird seat here. They're driving this. All they have to do is sit back and literally point to the scoreboard. Anytime the United States hesitates, tries to play tough with sanctions, just point to the scoreboard because Russia just keeps scoring every day, more and more, and there's nothing left for the Ukrainians. So we're approaching total collapse of the military, and when that happens, it's over. It's unconditional surrender. And so the United States, in many ways, it's a race against the clock to see if they can get Ukraine to agree to something that allows something called Ukraine that isn't totally controlled by Russia to exist, or if Russia just gets everything at once.
So, well, the economy is, of course, melting down. Militarily, they seem more and more defeated every day as the Russians are now rushing faster and faster forward. But the political meltdown is interesting. And of course, it intensified with the departure of Yermak, who I was a bit surprised. I thought Zelensky would hold on to him at all costs. But to a large extent, he was taken down with this anti-corruption agency. You said that America might be managing the decline or exit of Zelensky. To what extent, though, is this anti-corruption agencies influenced by the United States? Because as we learned from the beginning, the politicians, the military, the intelligence agencies, the media, a lot of this has been under very strict American control. Is the anti-corruption agency also a tool for the U.S. to, I guess, have some influence over who sits in Kiev?
I believe so. I mean, I don't have proof to this. This is purely speculation on my part. But the United States tolerated Ukrainian corruption, encouraged Ukrainian corruption. Some could say benefited from Ukrainian corruption, so long as Ukraine was able to deliver the goods on the battlefield, to have a robust defense, carry out counteroffensives on call, invade Kursk, all these things. The United States held their nose. I mean, it was so blatantly obvious when Congress would not even allow auditing mechanisms to be put in place because they know the truth. The truth has been known from day one that Ukraine is fundamentally corrupt from the top to the bottom. There's no aspect of Ukraine that's not corrupt. Even the anti-corruption forces, they don't work for Ukraine. They appear to have been, constructed at the behest of the United States as a mechanism of control. According to Ukrainian telegram channels, to take that as a grain of salt, but historically they've actually, I wouldn't quote them except that historically they've been fairly accurate in reading the tea leaves of Ukrainian politics and calling things out. They say things, and then a couple of weeks later, it turns out what they said was true. So they say that that the NABU, the anti-corruption organ, has the goods not just on Yermak but on Zelensky. That they have his voice knee deep in this current Michinik or whatever the guy's name is, Michnuk corruption scheme. But we've known this. I mean, that's why this isn't a shock. We know that they take a cut of everything. That this is how they stay in power. This is how they build, power structures. This is how you build your allies. It's your ability to funnel money into their pockets for the ability to get contracts to them. In many of these contracts are the equivalent of mafia, no-show jobs. You want to do construction in Brooklyn? Well, then you got to fund 50 jobs. 40 of them, people will show up. 10, nobody shows up. You're just paying for 10 bodies that the mafia pockets it. And that's how Ukraine has been functioning from day one. It's not a surprise to anybody. So for corruption suddenly to become an issue means that somebody wanted it to become an issue. And there's only one nation in the world that has that kind of power over Ukraine. That's the United States. So I do believe that this is a mechanism of pressuring Zelensky, manipulating the system. And if I was a Ukrainian, understand every single one of them is corrupt. There's not a clean person there. Everybody on that negotiating table is owned by the United States. When we decide to make them fall, they will collapse like a house of cards. That's my take on it.
Well, you mentioned before that the Europeans can't really escalate because they don't have the armies. I won't push back against this, but we've seen some more bold behavior from Ukraine. That is attacks on these Russian commercial ships, which well were referred to as Shadow Fleet or Dark Fleet, or the branding kind of is obvious. But Erdogan now complained that and expressed concern, given that there had been attacks on a Russian oil tanker within Turkey's economic zone. Do you see this as being desperate, I guess, attacks towards the end of a war, or trying to prove that Russia can be beaten, or how? Well, what are the risks of these attacks, though?
It's British driven. I mean, let's just be honest here. When we're talking about Ukrainian, naval drones, this is a 100% British driven operation. And it's the Brits have been, screaming the loudest about the Shadow Fleet influencing the Balts to do things. So this is just a desperate act on the part of Great Britain. It will have zero impact. I mean, these aren't Russian ships. I think one was Panamanian flag, Turkish-owned Panamanian flag. The others were Ghana or something, African flagged ships. Yeah, they're part of the so-called Shadow Fleet of uninsured or vessels that are outside the Lloyd's insurance umbrella that Russia can rely upon to move oil, despite the British-driven sanctions. But it's just going to backfire. I mean, already we see Turkey condemning Ukraine's action, Kazakhstan, and nations that were sympathetic to the Ukrainian cause are now, shouting out. They attacked a oil platform that pumps Kazakh oil, costing the Kazakhstan over $1 billion. That's how long do you have diplomatic support when you pull do stupid stunts like this? So this is just British stupidity. This is the Brits, stiff upper lip, boys. We're gonna stick it into the very end. Yes, stand your ground, the thin red line. Except the Brits aren't dying. It's the Ukrainians who are going to pay the price, and they're going to pay a horrible price. They will be abandoned by everybody when this is done. Nobody likes them. I said this from the very beginning. The only thing that makes Ukraine attractive is the money that goes into people's pockets. There's nothing attractive about Ukraine. It's not a functioning democracy. People don't look to it and say, this is the model we want to follow, boys. Good old, Poroshenko democracy, European equivalent of Jeffersonian democracy. No, nobody likes the Ukrainians. Nobody respects the Ukrainians. Everybody despises the Ukrainians. But so long as Ukraine is able to funnel money into people's pockets, and it can be used to, empower people geopolitically. I mean, hell, Europe's made a great, made a great, had a great moment there, allowing the Ukrainians to die by the hundreds of thousands for them. But it's over, and Ukraine will be abandoned. There's only one nation in the world that will ever put out a helping hand for Ukraine, a sincere helping hand. And that's Russia. And Ukraine's going to learn that in the future because that's their only salvation is through Russia. Unless you're a Western Ukrainian, then you die.
Yeah, that was actually a comment by Zelensky's former advisor, Arstovich. He was making the point that, ironically, the only two countries who would actually fight and die for Ukrainians were the Russians and the Belarusians. Ironically, because they're the ones now who are in war with them, given that they made themselves a frontline to Ukraine. So he said that the main correction now, if he was president, he would just first day he would go to Moscow and promise that the Ukraine would not allow itself to be used anymore as a frontline against the Russians.